Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Obviously, I'm Whitney from CIPO, and I'm so excited for today's webinar with Nicole Fetterly, registered dietitian and lecturer at University of Victoria. You may have seen Nicole recently with David Suzuki on the nature of things, talking about healthy eating during aging and older age. Nicole did speak at our BC chapter gathering in Kelowna a couple of years ago and was widely successful with that talk. So we've asked her back during our 2021 webinar series. So this is number 2 in that series. And we're super happy to have her with us. So just a couple of things from me during the webinar. If you want to ask a question, there are 3 ways you can do that. We will be taking live questions today. So you can use the chat function, you can raise your hand, or you can use the Q&A. So those will all be at either the top or the bottom of the screen, however you position that. If you're having any technical difficulties, just use the chat function, write a message to me, and I will help you out as best as I can. We also have another member of staff with us here today helping out. So please, ask a question if you want. Nicole will be answering questions after her talk. This is being recorded, so you can watch this later on our YouTube channel. Thank you all so much for joining us. So I'm going to hand this over now to Nicole. And on you go, Nicole.
Okay, thank you. So really just make sure I can.
Oh, I got to stop sharing my screen.
Oh, okay, I was wondering. I'm like, how do I have my share screen option? Let me just, there we go. Okay, can you see that okay?
Thumbs up, all good.
Perfect, wonderful. Well, thank you, Whitney, and thank you so much for having me here. Welcome, everyone. My name is Nicole Fetterly, and I'm a registered dietitian. I'm coming to you from the traditional territories of the Wasanich and Lekwungen peoples, and that is just outside of Victoria in the highlands of BC. So I live out in the country, and I'm really, really grateful to be able to live and work and play safely on these lands. And I hope that everywhere you guys are, you are also experiencing safety and wellness and health. It's a trying time. I thank you all for being here today and learning a little bit more about nutrition. I would love this to be useful for you. So as Whitney mentioned, I love to answer questions. I could talk all day about this topic. And so I will try to keep the talk to about 45 minutes and leave lots of time at the end for questions, but don't hesitate to pop them into the chat if they come up as we're going. So, oops, before we get into that, just a little bit about my background. No, that's not me. That's my little guy, but you get to see me on my video. So a picture of him I thought was just way too cute to pass up. I like to look at it every chance I get. And I am a mom of 2 wonderful kids, Nora, who's 12, and Max, who is 9. And really passionate about instilling food literacy in our youth. That is one of the things that I do in a couple of programs here in BC. One is called Appetite to Play, and it targets early years providers or daycare workers with healthy eating and physical activity information, and Generation Health, which helps BC families. So I do a lot of content development, including webinars, as well as website posts and recipes for those 2 programs. And of course, those websites are free and accessible to you guys. If you're looking for recipe ideas, I'm happy to share those in the chat later. As Whitney mentioned, I'm a nutrition instructor and a researcher at UVic. I teach about 250 students every term about nutrition and try and spread the good word about eating well and eating close to nature, which we will get to talk about today. I did just finish my master's in kinesiology at UVic, and I was researching how to nudge students to make better food choices for their health and for our planet. I am very passionate about a sustainable food system, and that's part of the research that I'm currently doing at UVic with a default veg initiative, trying to decrease the amount of animal proteins and red tier foods in terms of their scope 3 climate emissions, carbon emissions. and also working with food service providers to change our menus a little bit to help people make better choices for themselves and also for our planet. And I have been a dietitian for about 15 years in a whole host of different settings, from clinical, long-term care, to various food service settings, educational settings. One of the ones that really relates to our talk today is working for a company in BC here called Choices Markets. It's sort of the BC homegrown family version of Whole Foods, so not associated with Amazon. But Choices really helped me get to understand a lot about the natural and organics industry, really delve into some of the background of our food system, and also our other natural health products and body care items. That's how I came to be so passionate about this topic, which is what we not only eat, because we hear a lot about that, and of course everybody thinks, when they hear about that I'm a dietitian, it's one of the best parts about my job is I can talk to everybody about my job, because everybody eats. And we often think about this, you are what you eat, but we don't always think about we are what we breathe, and we are what we absorb. And so we're going to talk about those two pieces of this as well today. So working backwards, we're actually going to start with absorption. And this is just a little section of the skin. You can see, that outer part of the skin that, faces the air, faces the environment, obviously affords a lot of protection to us. And then we have these, blood vessels, this dermal layer, and that's where we have our hair follicles and things like that. But this blood vessel, so close to the surface, we can see plays a huge role in spreading what we put on our skin to a systemic reach throughout our body, right? So what we rub onto our skin actually reaches those blood vessels right below, and can spread throughout the body. And we know that everything that we put on our skin is absorbed and has this systemic reach, because this is actually how we take some medications. So there are some medications like hormone therapy, for example. So some women, as they go through menopause, there has been, various medications related to increasing hormone in our body to prevent things like bone density decline. And we know when we rub those hormones on our skin that they have this systemic reach throughout our body. So when we think about what we put on our body every day, so as I say, we think so much about what we eat, but we don't often think about things we apply maybe multiple times in a day, or certainly every day. So lotion or most moisturizers, potentially, our shampoos and our conditioners, the soap that we're using, our sunscreens, our cosmetics or makeup, and even things like our toothpaste, which is kind of on the border, right? We sort of put it on our body, but we don't swallow it, but we also put it in our mouth. So, getting a little kind of in between what we absorb and also what we eat there. So these are some of the products that I want you to think about that you use all the time and maybe don't really think about some of these ingredients. And part of the reason we don't often think about these ingredients is, because these lists on the back of these products are sometimes very, very, very long, and a lot of things that we don't understand. But some of the things that we really want to watch out for in these products, and they're becoming much more, there's a lot more awareness about them, and this means that there's actually a lot more options for avoiding them. But we see parabens listed in these products, and parabens are known as hormone disruptors, so we want to be cautious about those. We've got, and they are used in, all kinds of different products, from sunscreens to shampoos to various lotions. And triclosan is our next ingredient that we focus on. Triclosan is found in antimicrobial. It's an antimicrobial, so it's found in soaps. And it's also found in toothpaste. So again, we're getting pretty close to putting this in our mouth all the time. And triclosan does have some carcinogenic properties. We also know that retinol palmitate, this is an ingredient commonly used in sunscreen, and this is an ingredient also that can contribute lesions on our skin that may be carcinogenic. So the real question is, do we need those ingredients? Sometimes there are things that we have to make a choice about, right? Of course, medications and the ingredients that come along with those medications are often not a choice for us. But when we think about something we're putting on our skin for potentially cosmetic reasons, there are other options. And the point of this talk is certainly not to scare us. We have enough on our plate in terms of anxiety and our mental health dealing with this pandemic at the moment, and especially for everyone who's tuning into this webinar today and who are part of this CIPO organization. So we just want to make sure that I'm always wanting to make sure that I provide the positives and inspire you to make a really subtle change that could potentially make a long-term difference. So instead of some of those maybe less expensive body care items, and I don't want to throw certain stores under the bus, but if you're buying body care items at a place like a dollar store, sometimes we don't even see ingredient lists on those products. We just have no idea even what's in them. But even at drugstores, most general drugstores, so looking for more natural organic body care options or cosmetics. And organic is a really kind of loose term in this category because there is no organic certification for body care. And so really it's looking for more natural options in places where you might find organic foods. And we are seeing more options for these kind of body care options and cosmetics. And they will say right on them that they avoid things like parabens. They might avoid things like fragrance, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more in the next section. But I know the concern out there might be, well, how can I afford it? If you tuned in at the beginning, you might have heard that, the lip gloss that I'm wearing is a brand called Mineral Fusion. And if I mention brands today, it's certainly not because I'm representing any of them. But there are certain brands out there that are known to be more natural, and they're at stores like Whole Foods. That can be a very expensive place. Of course, the nickname of this place is Whole Paycheck, right? So we think, how could we spend this much on a lip gloss? So why would we spend $10 when we know we can get a lip gloss at the drugstore for $2? Well, if we think about it and that difference, is it something that you're applying every single day? And how long does it take to go through these things? So, there may be people that go through makeup faster, and that's totally cosmetics. No judgment if you like to wear cosmetics. I wear a little bit less. And so I find that, the amount of time it takes me to work through my body care items, it might be, say, 6 months. And when I think about the difference of $8 over 6 months, it's so little that it's worth making that choice. But there are some other options as well. So one of the ones I hear a lot about is coconut oil. People have questions about, oh, I hear coconut oil from, Dr. Oz or another one of the, kind of bloggers or media sensationalists out there might say coconut oil is your new ticket to everything, to health, to weight loss, anything you can imagine. But really coconut oil, I have to say, from a dietary perspective, it does still contain a lot of saturated fat, and saturated fat is linked to heart disease. And we don't know whether saturated fat that comes from plants is treated differently in our body than saturated fat that comes from animals. So at the moment, we can't recommend coconut oil as a health food. It can certainly be used moderately in our diet, and I'm happy to talk about oil choices later. But really, I think we could say for sure coconut oil could be used, small amounts to flavor things, or maybe if you are plant-based, this might play a role in some of your cooking. We also know if you're plant-based, you're not getting a lot of saturated fats from your animal food, so it would make a little bit more room for coconut oil in your life. But one thing I can say for sure is that coconut oil is a wonderful body care item. And in places where they grow coconuts, it is the #1 body care item. So it is what everybody uses as their moisturizer and even their hair conditioner. And the best thing about it is it has one ingredient. When you look for unrefined coconut oil, it's one single ingredient, as compared to all those moisturizers out there. Even the ones that I might choose that are natural or organic still have a ton of ingredients. So organic, or doesn't have to be organic, but an unrefined or virgin coconut oil can be a great thing to use for body care. And then when we're thinking about sunscreen, and of course this is very important, we do want to balance, for one, getting enough vitamin D. So we want to get our vitamin D from the sun, but we want to make sure that we're not burning in the sun. And so a barrier sunscreen, as opposed to a chemical sunscreen, is a way to avoid some of those ingredients like the parabens and the retinol palmitate. So barrier sunscreens tend to be made with a couple minerals. One's called zinc oxide and another one's called titanium oxide. And instead of interacting with your skin to be that chemical barrier, it just creates like a shield. And I know it does sometimes leave that kind of white film that isn't the prettiest. It's certainly not your kind of glowing copper tone or what are some banana boat that make you all shiny. It's a different type of sunscreen, but they do really work, and it is a much better product for your skin. And you know, because it stays on the top of the surface, it's not going to absorb as readily as the chemical sunscreens that rub in. If you are looking for more information on this, and you know, I do want to keep things moving, so lots more information on this topic. So the World Health Organization, for example, is looking at these different chemicals. We have the CDC looking at skin. So if you want to check out the CDC, that's an American government website, but they had a little bit more information, I found, than the Canadian website on this topic. And then another one to mention, and I'll talk about it a little later as well, is called the Environmental Working Group, EWG.org. And this is a fantastic organization. They create a skin deep guide to cosmetics. So they'll actually tell you more about the ingredients in your cosmetics and body care products, and why those ingredients are problematic, and steer you in a direction of maybe finding some that are a little better. Again, they're not representing any brands, but can just help you navigate this very tricky world, because again, it's not highly available what these ingredients are and what they can do. Okay, so that was absorb, and now we think about what we breathe. And we know that indoor air pollution, so the air quality in most of our homes, is more toxic than living in a large urban center. So some of our most smoggiest, most polluted cities, we still have worse indoor air quality in our own homes. So when we think about what is in the air of our homes, or maybe our office buildings, if you're going to the office, I feel very fortunate. I get to work out of my home office because of the pandemic, and you know, with webinars these days. Not that I wouldn't love to be back in Kelowna with all of you, or maybe hopefully at your national conference with you one day. But for now, we are coming from home. And so one of the chemicals that we're concerned about in our home are called phthalates. I know it's a funny little word there with the PH, phthalates, but we pronounce it phthalates. And phthalates are also hormone disruptors. So when we think about hormone disruptors, endocrine disruptors, we get concerned about a couple things in our body. For one, we think about cancer. So the #1 cancers in North America are breast cancer and prostate cancer. These are hormone-related cancers. We also know that when we disrupt hormones and endocrines, our reproductive hormones, we can also influence things like sperm count and fertility for both men and women. So we have seen drops in sperm count over the years, over the decades, because of various compounds in our environment. And there are other ones out there too. This is not the only one that's problematic, but phthalates are one of the big culprits. And they are added to plastics. And so that's when we hear about things like plastics off-gassing. And also, you know, we have concerns about other ingredients in plastics. You've probably heard long ago about things like BPA. But phthalates are also very much tied to fragrance. And this is something I feel is reported or underappreciated in our society. And I'll get to it in just a sec. So the other one we're looking at today are volatile organic compounds. We call these VOCs. And this is another one that we hear a lot about when we think about off-gassing. And the ones that we'd see on this list would be toluene, xylene, benzene, ethylbenzene, and formaldehyde. So where are we going to find these things? Well, cigarette smoke, I would imagine most of you out there are avoiding cigarette smoke, whether ingesting it yourself or in a home. If somebody does smoke, then they should smoke outdoors. We also want to be concerned about building materials. So our paints, this is where we get, and new furnitures, this is where we get a lot of the VOCs from. So off-gassing of new furniture. One recommendation, if you can do it, if you do get a new piece of furniture, is to leave it outside for a little while before it's in your home. And same kind of thing with building materials and renovations. If you have the ability to really watch out for your airflow through your room. We'll get into that in just a sec. Some of the other suggestions with off-gassing we'll get into for furniture in just a minute. Nail polish is another one. That's where we see a lot of that formaldehyde and toluene. I know when we think about those cosmetics, and especially the natural nail polish removers, I know they don't work as efficiently. I get that. I understand that natural cosmetics don't necessarily have the same staying power. But it's this staying power that I really want to talk about when we think about fragrance. And when we think about fragrance, we're talking a lot about air fresheners, scented cleaning products, and laundry soaps. But of course, anything that we put on our body, whether it's lotions or actually spraying perfume. So there are some exceptions to that we'll get into. But basically what happens is we bind the fragrance to this molecule called a phthalate. And it helps that fragrance stick around. So generally speaking, when we have a fragrance, maybe it's a flower, or maybe it's some essential oil that you're using in your house, or maybe it's a cooking smell, that fragrance dissipates. It leaves over time. We don't smell it forever. We'd have to keep, pumping that out. But when we have a phthalate bound to that fragrance, it makes it linger. And the best example of this is to think about our laundry soap. So we think about a conventional laundry soap, and we wash our clothes with it, and everybody has their own kind of brands that they like. And when you go to open up your drawer, even 4 weeks later, those clothes that you washed in that laundry soap, or maybe it's the static, what's that thing called? Sorry, I don't use them, the static guard. Maybe it's that smell that lingers, and it still smells like that. You see the person on the commercial and they take their shirt out of the drawer and hold it up to their nose and smell it, and it still smells like that product. And there's a very good reason for that. And it is because that company wants you to have an association with that smell. And our sense of smell is very tied in to our emotions, our comfort. It's part of our limbic system in our brain. So they're actually playing with your brain with these smells. And this may be why, I grew up, my mom used Downy, my mom used Tide, and we have this sense of comfort from it. And then when we go to the grocery store, and I'm sure you've all experienced this, you walk down that aisle of the cleaning products and the laundry soaps, and I mean, to me, it's overwhelming, the smell, but the smell triggers your association with that product, so you continue to pick up the same product. So it's actually part of their marketing to get you to have this smell that lingers for a long, long time on your clothes or your towels. It's not necessarily about them smelling clean, because we'll talk about that. But this is the issue with some of these fragrances, is if they linger, it means they have a phthalate attached to them. And that phthalate is also lingering in your body. So instead, I know, don't be scared. There's so many things we can do. So of course, not smoking indoors, as I've already mentioned. If we are doing some painting projects or some renovations, I know those have been going on a lot through COVID. There are lots of options at the stores for zero VOC paints. We can also request from different stores that we're buying from to not have flame retardant chemicals added to our mattresses or our furniture. why did they add all this flame retardant to these furniture pieces? Why did this become part of our society? And it was regulated for a while. It's not now. It's not a requirement by law. And it's because people used to smoke so much. And people used to fall asleep in bed with their cigarette or fall asleep on the couch and set themselves on fire. And so they would coat it in a chemical so that the reaction from falling asleep with your cigarette, of course, candles and things like that could be a culprit as well, but that was the big one. And now we don't smoke as much inside, hopefully. We don't smoke in bed and on the couch. And so the need for this flame retardant on our furniture, on our mattress, something we're sleeping on for 8 hours a night, doesn't need to be there. So there are options to get more natural versions of those as well. Instead of spraying some of those products like I showed in the last slide in our homes, we know that there are, this company is out there saying you should be spraying this liberally throughout your home all the time. Instead, we could look for essential oils, and the essential oil diffuser industry has taken off, and essential oils are definitely a better choice. But we also want to get away from the idea that scent means it smells like lavender, or scent means it smells like a pine forest, or scent means it smells like, one of these brand name products. Actually, clean shouldn't smell like anything. And so we can get around with, you can buy absolutely unscented cleaning products, unscented laundry soap. And if anybody's had issues with their skin, and maybe this is sometimes where we start, is you have eczema or you have another kind of inflammatory skin condition. When we cut the fragrance out, we see that immediate difference. Our laundry soap, especially for, we're wearing our pants all day, we're lying in our sheets all day. And when we have this fragrance on those fabrics, we know that it can irritate our skin. So unscented versions of those can help with that, as well as not be contributing these phthalates into our air. Natural versions of these cleaning products are better. But there's also, good old baking soda and vinegar. So we put these things, vinegar and baking soda, into our bodies. So we know that they are safer to be in our environment as well. And, we do have to use a bit more elbow grease. You can't just spray the baking soda and vinegar and expect it to drip down the tiles of your shower and miraculously clean it. You're going to actually have to scrub and get that strength in there. But that actually just builds our activity level, and we all probably need a little bit more activity in our life. And then another big thing to remember is opening our windows. So we control that aspect of our air quality. We have such an issue, especially in our colder parts of the country, with needing to keep our windows closed because of heating in the winter. And that can really, really play a big role in not getting this airflow through our homes. So the recommendation is actually to open your windows, but not a crack just for a little bit. It's to open your windows, like all your windows in your house, even in the winter, for a certain period of time, as much as you can handle, maybe half an hour, but just to clear it out and exchange that air. So a good thing to think about. Or maybe it's even in the summer in some of those hot places. And of course, we're fortunate here in BC where I am, where we don't deal with the extreme heat and the need for air conditioning either. So more information, of course, always trying to give you those reputable resources to check when you want to look at more information about these issues. So Canada.ca, this is our government website, and they'll talk about those VOCs and how to limit them. And then also they have a page about phthalates. So they are chemicals that are deemed safe at the moment by the government. They're still allowed to be used, but they have more information. And as I kind of say, if you don't have to use them, there's still unscented version. I'm not saying you have to use baking soda and vinegar for your laundry, but choose an unscented product if you can. And that can help with those. Okay. So now getting into my favorite topic, which is what we eat. And, you know, I could talk about this all day, as I say, but some of the big ingredients that we want to be watching for when we're thinking about what we're eating, number one are these trans fats. And trans fats are getting worked out of our food supply, but they are very definitively linked to heart disease. And we know heart disease is the #1 killer in the world. And so we want to avoid trans fats. And there's still, you know, I think there's another year before they have to be fully worked out of the food supply. The government gave the food industry a big chunk of time to get it done. And so we can still read products and look out for ingredients called hydrogenated and partially hydrogenated oils. When you see those terms, it means that there's going to be trans fats, even if it's a very small amount. And sometimes companies can be a little bit I want to say mischievous or misleading, and they could choose a serving size on the nutrition facts table that undercuts the amount of trans. So it might be a percentage, 0.1, and they can round it down to 0. But if you eat enough of this product, that could actually creep up to a decent level of these hydrogenated oils. So we want to watch out for something like shortening. And we'll talk about, of course, better options. So, you know, you want to make a pie as all the wonderful summer fruit starts up in a little while. A better choice would be butter. And we can talk about that as we go. We also want to watch out for hard margarine. And you don't see this as much anymore. It's kind of the more inexpensive, like stick margarine. Most of the ones that are probably more commonly purchased, maybe like a Baecel margarine or an Earth Balance vegan type margarine, those are going to be non-hydrogenated margarines. We also see these preservatives that get used called mono and diglycerides. They're in things like ice creams and cottage cheese. They act as stabilizers. And so those are actually a source of trans fats. Deep fried foods can often be fried in these hydrogenated oils. And then grocery store baked goods can sometimes be problematic. It depends on your grocery store, but they might be using shortening or hard margarine. And that's why those baked goods are problematic. And the other tricky part about something in a grocery store is they don't always tell you what's in the product because they aren't required by law to label it if it's made on site. But of course, they're looking to get the most bang for their buck, and so they will often avoid using more expensive fats. Some crackers and chips and chocolate bars and candies will also use these trans fats. They were created to basically provide shelf life, so that chocolate bar can last for 3 years on the shelf instead of, you know, whatever it would be, maybe 6 months or a year. Do we need things to last for, you know, 3 years on the shelf? I know maybe in some communities, but I think most of us have access to food more often than that. So luckily, as I say, those are getting worked out of the food supply. Some of the other ones we want to watch out for are sodium nitrites and nitrates, and we see these in a lot of our processed and preserved deli meats. These are connected to cancer, so carcinogenic compounds, sodium nitrates and nitrates, and basically we also see the response from the producers of these products using other things instead of sodium nitrite, the chemical. They'll use something like celery salt, which naturally has nitrates in it. But it's not just the sodium nitrite and nitrate in these products that's problematic from a carcinogenic perspective. So the World Health Organization has listed preserved and processed deli meats as carcinogens across the board, and it's also about the meat itself. And we think, you know, this is a strong connection to something like colon cancer. We also know colon cancer is quite genetic. So if that's in your family, this might be an especially important place to target in your life. So I like to say that, you know, and Canada's new food guide, actually, the 2019 food guide did recommend limiting these kind of processed deli meats. And of course, choosing plant-based protein foods more often than animal foods. So I tend to say bacon, you know, it's not an everyday food. It's not a Sunday food. It's actually more of a holiday or a special occasion food. And that's the same with a lot of these different things, whether it's deep fried foods or whether we're going to talk about sugar in a little while, or these kind of processed and preserved meats. It's really more that we save them for special occasions and they shouldn't be part of our everyday shops or our weekly shops. Instead of these foods, I know these are very common at breakfast, but lots of other options, and eggs still a better choice and a great way to get that savory protein at breakfast if you do like it. You don't necessarily need to also add the meat component. And of course, there's all kinds of other great, plant-based breakfast options. In terms of things like sandwiches, I would say if you can, put some hummus on a sandwich would be great, but otherwise try some canned fish, try some egg salad, try some just cooked meat. So you make some meat for dinner one night, make a little extra, and then use that for your sandwich filling, whether it's some pulled pork or whether it's a little bit of, cooked chicken. A better choice than the processed deli meats. And my other little shout out is that veggie pizza is just as tasty as the meat lovers. Another one we want to watch out for are our food additives. So food colorings have been linked lightly to things like ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactive disorder. And we do know that ADHD is being diagnosed more and more frequently, not just in children, but in adults. So, again, it's kind of one of these things, do you need it, right? Do you need to have your cupcakes be pink? Or could the cupcakes be white icing? Right? But again, if it's just once a year on your birthday, then it doesn't really matter. So we want to more think about these colors if it's something we consume all the time or feed our children all the time, like say a sports drink. We know that they have come under scrutiny for the colored additives. We think about certain breakfast cereals. I won't throw any, toucans under the bus, but that's not the rainbow of colors that we're really looking for in our diet. We're looking for this rainbow of colors to come from our fruits and vegetables, and of course we can use those to color our foods for fun if we want to. Artificial flavor, some of our other preservatives. Again, we're trying to extend the shelf life, and this takes us back to that preserved meats or processed meats conversation. There was a reason that we preserved food. There was a really important reason, and that was to last through winters. That was because we didn't have things like refrigeration. We had to salt our meats. We had to dry them. We had to, use things as preservatives like salt and sugar, right? But now we all have access to most foods, 24/7, or if we don't, we have freezers, we can keep things at home, we have refrigerators. And so this need to preserve things for a long time is not as necessary. One of the other ones is MSG, or monosodium glutamate. This ingredient has come under a lot of controversy. It's deemed generally recognized as safe by, Canadian American, Health Canada, for example. But some people do have a reaction to MSG as a known thing. It tends to cause headaches and flushing of the skin. And so, that's kind of the reason to watch out for. It's not everybody that has that reaction though. This is a list of, not avoidance, I would say. This is more limiting. And I guess I said those processed and preserved meats, we were supposed to limit those to special occasions. So this one is limit as well. So looking at pesticides, we can also talk about organic foods in a little bit. And some of our genetically modified organisms. We want to watch out for sugar. So we know sugar does play a huge role in our immune health. We also know that artificial sweeteners aren't this magic bullet solution. Oh, I really want sugar. I know it's bad for me. Oh, there's this chemical processed white product that replicates sugar. That must be a perfect, solution substitution. Well, that's not really the answer. And we know that those artificial sweeteners are certainly not contributing any health to our body. We often get very focused on sugar when we think about if anybody's out there with diabetes, for example, but we also know that our refined carbohydrates, so our white flour and our white rice, and even really concentrated sources of natural sugars like fruit juice, for example, can really ramp up our blood sugar very quickly and cause very big spikes in our blood sugar and our hormones that respond to it. And so we do want to watch out for those refined carbohydrates, those white flours, just as much as we watch out for our added sugars. And then excess sodium. Anybody out there with potentially kidney issues or heart issues or high blood pressure, of course, we want to watch out for sodium. But we know that, you know, for some of us, we need sodium. So we don't necessarily all need to be low sodium. We do need a certain amount of sodium in our diet, say 1,500 milligrams a day. But the problem is that most people in North America consume 3,000 to 4,000 milligrams a day, so more than double or even triple. And the problem is that when we have a high sodium diet, often we have a lack of our fresh vegetables and fruit that contain potassium. And sodium, potassium are these sort of, you know, complementary or kind of molecules that work together in our body. And when we have a lot of processed and packaged foods and excess sodium, and we have a lot of low potassium foods, we basically have this imbalance. So the reason we often lower sodium, we're also trying to bring up the potassium level as well, so they are more in balance. And most of us in Canada are excess in sodium and low in potassium, maybe half of what's recommended for potassium. So instead of some of those ingredients that I talked about, and they really are found most predominantly in what we call ultra processed or highly processed foods. So we want to look instead at fresh or minimally processed foods. We want to choose more unrefined oils. So olive oil really being the kind of best research on olive oil, and you've probably heard about the Mediterranean diet and olive oil and olives being a real central feature of that diet, and great health profile in terms of our heart health. Avocado oil has a very similar fat profile, but it actually has more vitamin E in it, and that means it can go up to a higher heat without smoking, because that's sometimes what we get worried about with olive oil, is it can't go to a very high heat. That said, we shouldn't really cook our foods on a really high heat, so grilling or charring or searing things. When we form those kind of charred compounds, those are also carcinogenic compounds, so we want to limit those. So cooking at a lower, slower temperature, braising, baking, those are better strategies. I know we're coming into grilling season, it being summer, and we're so fortunate to have some warm weather this week, and I know it is lovely to cook outdoors. I also love to cook over a fire, and I know campfires also not problematic from our air pollution standpoint. But when we are cooking outdoors on the grill, we can marinate our foods in acidic ingredients. So adding that lemon juice or that vinegar for our cooked proteins, or for cooking our proteins, that can help minimize some of those carcinogenic compounds that form. Some of our other unrefined oils we might use are things like sesame oil, and that's one that we also don't want to heat up. It's one we want to keep at you know, room temperature cold to prevent rancidity and to prevent the smoke factor. So we just use it to kind of drizzle on, or make in a salad dressing, or drizzle on for some flavor after. So olive oil, I like to say 80% of our choices for fats, and 20% we have room for, you know, maybe some of our butter or our coconut oil or our higher heat oils that you might want to use. We want to choose legumes. So beans, peas, and lentils are the most affordable and sustainable protein choice on this planet. Canada's new food guide in 2019 recommended that, you know, a quarter of our meals and a quarter of our plate at our meals and snacks should come from protein, and that we should choose plant-based protein foods more often than animal foods. And most of us don't have a hard time including animal foods like meat and dairy in our diet. So plant-based protein foods are really the focus to try and get people consuming those more often. And lots of great recipes I can share if you guys are interested through some of the other work that I do. As I mentioned before, cooking our meats ourselves can actually be a much better solution if you are eating meat than choosing the processed and preserved meats. And cooked fish is especially one, or canned fish, to recommend. So our fatty fish is very, very important. It's important for our immune systems, our brains, our hearts, our skin, our eyes. And that's those omega-3 fatty acids. And they're especially high in our canned salmon, our sardines, our herring, our mackerel. And those are absolutely things I recommend keeping in the pantry. You can also get them from cooked versions of those same things. But I find that the canned versions are just a really great thing to keep around to make a meal come together quickly and get us those essential omega-3s. We can also get those omega-3s from our, in the plant world, from chia seeds, ground flax seeds, and walnuts. And if you don't eat fatty fish, it is recommended to consume those foods, chia or flax or walnut, every day, a couple tablespoons, to get those essential omega-3 fatty acids that we cannot make in our body. Natural and organic processed foods, they still could have a ton of sugar in them. They could still be made with white flour. The thing about them, you know, if you are wanting to choose something for convenience, is that they probably won't have the artificial colors, and they're going to think a little bit more about the quality of the ingredients. Usually you can recognize and pronounce the ingredients a little bit more. And that's the general recommendation that I have, is you should be able to recognize the ingredients on a processed or packaged food, and ideally be able to make it in your own home kitchen. Like, you don't need a factory or a laboratory to make this food. So butter, for example, you know, one ingredient, maybe two: cream, salt, and a lot of elbow grease. You can churn it. Margarine, you can't make that at home. We don't have mono and diglycerides in our cupboards. We usually don't have whey powder. Maybe we don't have the soybean oil. It's very hard to make something like that. Or some of these other processed foods with these endless ingredient lists of things we don't know and we can't pronounce. From a sweetener perspective, honey and maple syrup are a little less refined. They still raise our blood sugar in the same way as white sugar does. But we may use a little less of them because they have more flavor, and also because they're probably more expensive. So we might be a little more, use a little bit less in our coffee or our tea, for example. But if we're looking for a sweet treat to have every day or more often, you know, we can really focus on our natural sources of sugar. So this is our fruit, even our dried fruit. So pureed dates make a wonderful basis for things like muffins and cookies and energy balls. And we can use fruit in that kind of way to flavor things with a little bit of sweetness if we like that treat in the afternoon, maybe, or after dinner. And then lots of water as opposed to our sugary beverages. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I realize I am chatting more than or as much as I always think I'm going to, and I do want to save room for your questions. But if you are focused on the organic issue, I wanted to mention the EWG.org again, or in the environmental working group that I mentioned when I talked about the Skin Deep Guide for cosmetics. They also have a Dirty Dozen list every year they created, and they're measuring the pesticide residues left on foods. And they create this Dirty Dozen list of the foods, the fruits and vegetables that have the most contamination. In contrast, they also have the Clean 15, which is the fruits and vegetables that have the least amount of contamination. And it's really important to pay attention to as well, because we all, you know, most of us don't have endless amounts of money to spend on food. And so when I go to the store, I will look and prioritize those Clean 15 items with my budget for conventional, and then maybe prioritize the budget that I have towards organics for these Dirty Dozen. Because we do know that pesticides are problematic. It doesn't mean organic foods are completely free of pesticides. They can have residue, but they have less. And we know that those chemicals that are used are not only problematic for human health, but especially for the humans that are spraying them or exposed to them in those farmers' fields, and also to the environmental consequences of spraying those chemicals. So overall, main takeaways are, you probably heard of Michael Pollan's statement: eat food, not too much, mostly plants. Absolutely. And even if those plants aren't organic, it's still important to consume them as much as we can. One of the best things we can do is cook at home more often. And I know based on this pandemic, you're probably doing that. That's, I guess, one of the silver linings for me as a dietitian, is that people have been cooking more. But we just control our ingredients so much more. And we know that foods that we eat out are just, generally speaking, devoid of most of our nutrients, especially fiber, especially our vegetables and our plant-based proteins. So half our plate veggies and fruit at each meal is really the key to be getting so many wonderful nutrients that I'm going to get to on our next slide. And I've mentioned this enough already, which is more plants than animals. But those fruits and veggies really help to give us these very important antioxidants. And these are some of the key ones for our immune and our lung health. And that's our antioxidants, like our vitamins A, C, and E. Vitamin C, you might think about you're taking it as a supplement. We know we hear about it, those emergency packets, all that kind of stuff. But we do know that excess vitamin C as a supplement can lead to things like diarrhea and digestive upset. So can too much of any vitamin supplement lead to side effects. And often those side effects are digestive, right? Diarrhea, which is uncomfortable for a lot of people, especially if you're already suffering with a digestive condition. So we want to remember that vitamin C is very readily available in our food supply from our vegetables and fruit. So if you're consuming vegetables and fruit, half of your plate at most meals and snacks, you're well needing. You're probably getting triple the amount of vitamin C that you need in a day. And we know that, you know, in terms of reducing, say, the common cold, for example, we only need about double the amount of vitamin C from our RDA to meet that. And it doesn't actually prevent colds, it just reduces the severity or the length of time. Avocados and nuts and seeds can also be really great sources of especially our vitamin E. And avocado and nuts and seeds provide healthy fats for us that help us absorb certain vitamins called fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin E, as well as our vitamins A and K and D. Another couple ones to think about when we're really focusing on trying to build immune cells and support our lung health are, of course, protein and zinc. And luckily, zinc really goes along with our protein foods. So we're prioritizing our legumes, nuts, and seeds every day. I've mentioned our fatty fish, that's so important. And then instead of those processed and preserved meats, getting our protein from poultry is a better choice for our health and for the environment. And then lean, grass-fed, or wild meats are also a better choice. Okay, you guys, that brings me to the end of my slides, and I would be absolutely happy to answer any questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen just so that I can see you all better and access the Zoom a little bit better. And before I stop talking and turn it over to Whitney with the questions, I will just let you know that I'm happy to share this slide deck. And so if Whitney wants to send it around, I hope I should have told you this at the beginning so that you weren't scrambling to take notes, but happy to share that information.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much, Nicole. That was great. I hope everyone really liked it. We do have about 8 minutes for questions. So I do have some that we got beforehand. So we'll start with those. So what are 3 things that someone can do to boost their immune system every day? So 3 changes that someone can make to boost their immune system every day.
Absolutely. So we've talked about a little bit of that already, but I would really say, you know, from a food perspective, because of course we could get into sleep, we could get into all that kind of stuff, not my expertise area. But in terms of a food perspective, I think, you know, number 1, I would be focusing on getting that amount of water that you need. So for women, we know we need 9 cups a day. It's not what we all heard growing up, 8 cups a day. Women actually need 9 cups and men need 12 cups.
Wow.
Yeah, it's more than we think. And of course, we need more if we're exercising or if we're getting out into hot weather. And yay, the weather's getting hotter. So we need more every time that's going on. Or if we have any losses. So if you were sick with something like diarrhea, we would need more water as well. But we know water is so important in terms of really getting all the nutrients to all the parts of our body that we need, and also getting all the waste products or toxins out of our body as well. So water, I'd say, would be number 1. We want to watch out for that sugar. We know sugar is problematic. And so I would say, you know, cutting back on added sugars would be a really great thing to do for your immune system. And then focusing on those veggies and fruit, protein, those are kind of our best sources of nutrients that we really need to build all those immune cells and support our bodies in the best way.
Awesome. Second question here. What are your thoughts on probiotics?
Probiotics. Oh my goodness. Thank you for asking this. I should have built this into the talk, of course. Yes, I was focused on what to avoid instead of what to include. And so swaps, but yes, we could have a whole separate talk, Whitney, about fermented foods and probiotics. I know you have a gut health coming up, so maybe that'll come up, but tying into probiotics. So these are the healthy bacteria that live in our gut, and we all have a different microbiome, but that microbiome is really our first stage of immune defense in our body, and plays a big role in terms of also helping us digest nutrients, even produce some nutrients. And we know that a depleted microbiome can have serious health consequences. And we're only just scratching the surface. It's like we're at the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we're discovering may be caused by an unhealthy microbiome. And the way we deplete that microbiome is with, unfortunately, antibiotics, which I know is something that your audience out there might be facing a lot of. We also deplete it with things like stress, but also our diet plays a big role. And so if we are consuming a lot of processed and packaged foods, we aren't giving those bacteria the nutrients they need. And the nutrients they need are called prebiotics. So these are fibers found especially in some of our vegetables, our beans and peas and lentils. So our fiber foods feed those bacteria. And that's really a key thing to keeping them growing. So generally speaking, we should try to get those probiotics from fermented foods. That's the best source in our diet for us to consume these healthy bacteria. And we get these fermented foods. These fermented foods would be things like our yogurt, maybe kefir, so fermented milk products, or there are some, like fermented cheeses. We also have some of our fermented vegetable products like our sauerkraut or our kimchi, or other types of pickles potentially, depending how they're made. You can also have a non-fermented vinegar pickle or something like that. Even things like our sourdough breads, right? These are fermented foods that we consume. So lots of different fermented foods from around the world. And there are so many that I haven't even mentioned that are common in so many cultures, but really not so much here in North America. So they're starting to catch on. Oh, kombucha, of course, I hadn't mentioned kombucha, and have to. But, the best thing we can do, if possible, is to make those fermented foods at home. Now, we want to be cautious when we're talking about people with immune deficiency. We want to still have a very clean environment, and we want to really be versed in what we're doing to make sure that we're not exposing ourselves to unhealthy pathogens. But the benefit of making these foods yourself is that you're actually bringing in the healthy bacteria from your own environment, as opposed to like a factory saying, oh, this is the bacteria we're going to put in, right? The tricky part also is that it's hard to study, because it's hard to say, hey, why don't you make your sauerkraut, Whitney, and I'll make my sauerkraut, and then we'll test and see who's, sauerkraut is. That's not how a gold standard double-blind randomized control trial works.
Right.
And so most research is done on this kind of topic is on a product, like a probiotic supplement. And so those are an option as well. And I do recommend a probiotic supplement if you've been on a course of antibiotics to help replete your depleted microbiome. But in terms of just maintaining it, it's healthy fermented foods and prebiotics, those good fibers to help support the probiotics. And you can get good products, even food products out there on the marketplace. You're looking for, generally speaking, like raw or unpasteurized are going to have those bacteria present. If something's shelf stable, like the sauerkraut or the pickle is now shelf stable, it means that they've heated it to a temperature, pasteurized it, so it's going to kill those healthy bacteria. And it's just going to be a product that's essentially salty, a lot of salt. And it might have been fermented from the get-go, but it doesn't have probiotics left. So a little bit of a distinction. And the only thing I would say is if you are really in a depleted situation, then you might just really want to know what your company is that you're dealing with and take it slow, because a raw unpasteurized product does have that more potential for potentially an unhealthy pathogen. So I always just want to put that out there, considering our audience.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Well, I think that's it for us for today. If anyone has any other questions, you can always email us at info@cipo.ca, and we'll pass your messages on to Nicole, and hopefully we'll see more of her in the future. We've been so happy and lucky to have her with us today. And of course, we will be sharing her slides, and we'll be posting this webinar up on our YouTube channel for anyone who wants to share it or to watch it again. So thank you, Nicole, and thank you everyone for joining us. And we'll be seeing you on our next webinar, June 9th, for complementary and alternative medicine with Dr. Terry Cargill. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thanks, Whitney. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks. Anytime, Nicole.
Take care,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye.